If you ever want to make something really awesome out of live edge lumber, but you didn't really know where to get started or what to do, well, this video is for you. In this video, we're going to talk about a few things: how to debark, how to cut it square, if you're going to saw legs, what to do, if to use C-channel, and all that type of stuff. So hang on, let's get to work. It's going to be a fun one. So the first thing I do is to cut it to a rough length with a chainsaw. You can use a skill saw, it doesn't really matter. Just get it rough cut, leave a few inches on each end so you got room to work. After we got it rough cut to length, I actually took the slab to a local cabinet shop and had them run it to their planer sander. The reason why I did that is because I have done this size of slab with a router sled and it sucks really bad. And they're cheap, they do it for me, and they do an awesome job. So I did that. Now, after I did that, I had to do what I consider to be the worst part of live edge work, and that is debarking. So there's 3 different steps or tools that I use to actually debark a slab. One is an old chisel. Don't use a new one because you'll mess it up. So an old chisel and a mallet, and just start hammering away at the sides. Now after I use a mallet, I get out a drawbar and I kind of scrape and cut the stringy part of the bark off. Now once I get that done, I break out the power tools just because I love power tools, and I use a side grinder with a flapper disc, like a sanding disc, and I actually finish everything off to get everything off. It leaves it nice and neat. Now remember, if you are using a flapper disc, keep your grinder moving. That way you don't deteriorate the live edge look and you don't leave any burn marks. So keep your grinder moving and you'll be fine. So I've had people ask me before, how do you find the center of a live edge slab to cut it square, to make sure everything is square on both sides and it looks halfway decent and your cuts don't look like this? So there's 3 easy steps. 1, measure the width of each end and then divide that by 2. Draw your mark. Step 2, take a chalk line or a straight edge or something and draw it from the center of that mark to the center of the other mark. 3, take a framing square, lay it on the center mark and draw your line across. So let's get to work and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. So what I did here was I actually pulled a string from mark to mark. Sorry, my big ass is right in the way and you can't really see, but I laid the chalk line right on each center mark and then popped it. So once you get your chalk line laid, you can see that the line goes right over the center mark that I made and it runs down the entire length of the slab. So once you get your line laid out, you want to take your framing square and lay the inside of your square right onto the chalk line. And you want to make sure it's nice and flush with your line, and then that creates a square across the slab. And then once you get one line marked, simply flip the framing square over, lay the inside of the framing square on the line again. Now make sure the bottom side of your framing square is even with the line you just drew, and then you finish it out across the slab. And then that becomes your cut line for one side to be square. So we've got one side cut, now we got to cut it to its final length. So what I'm going to do is measure it, mark my final length, and then use a framing square on my center line again on the final length mark to cut it square. So let's get to work. So it's super important to make sure that you keep your slab square as you can to the edges, because if you're trying to make a table and you need to keep your legs square to the edges to make it all look right and not look like a complete piece of shit, then that's what you have to do. Next part is going to be prepping the slab for finish. So I'm gonna sand this thing up to 220 grit, but before I do that, we have these little things to take care of. I have this hole, that hole, and that one. So what you do with these is entirely up to you. There's 3 different approaches really. You can pour penetrating epoxy in there to try to harden all that stuff up. You can clean it out with a Dremel or just leave it alone. That's entirely up to you. My thinking is I at least like to use penetrating epoxy to harden it up, so that way it's not falling out everywhere once you're using it, especially if you're making a table. You don't want dirt in your food. Or you get a Dremel, clean all the dirt and debris out, get it cleaned up good, or a wire brush, scrape everything out. And once you do that, you can put your finish on there and kind of keep everything nice and clean. But that's up to you. Do whatever you want to do. Just my advice. So now comes the fun part of any woodworking project, and that's the sanding phase. So the way that I sand majority of all my stuff is 80 grit, 120 grit, 180 grit, then 220 grit. Now I'll get to 220 grit, sand it, spray some water on there. That's called water popping. Let it dry, then sand with 220 grit again, and it works out great. But with this one, I'm only going to sand it to 180 grit just because it's going to be a wall piece. There's no need for it to be super smooth. But with all live edge stuff, you got a few different options that you can do on the live edge side of the slab. So with this one, since I am trying to keep it as natural as possible, I'm not really going to mess with the natural curvature of the wood. A lot of times if I'm making a table or a coffee table or something that your arm is going to rub on a lot, kind of like that, I'll take a sander and I'll knock that edge down just so it's not so sharp. Same thing with the corners and all that good stuff. And with this one, I'm going to leave all those marks left over from the grain and from where I sanded it down just to give it that natural look. But what you can do is you can either hand sand it to a certain degree, or you can get like a little triangle sander, or however different ways you can do it, and sand that down as well. Now, when you're working with live edge stuff or any wood project in general, take your time. And what you'll see me do a lot is I get a nice mechanical pencil and I will draw on the slab like that. Draw a whole bunch of lines. And you can kind of see them. What that does is it allows you to make sure that you're sanding evenly across the slab, because you don't want to get too heavy in one spot or not enough in another. So your pencil marks kind of act as a gauge to make sure you're sanding evenly. So that's enough about the most boring part of woodworking. So let's just get to it. And yes, you will see me using a rigid shop vac with my Festool sander. Why? Because I don't have the money to spend on a Festool shop vac. So the next step after you got everything sanded is going to be to stain the slab. Now, it's entirely up to you if you want to stain it. I personally try to go with the natural color of the wood, but if you're on a budget and you can't find exactly what you're looking for, because walnut's expensive, mahogany is expensive, and other wood types are just sometimes too expensive. Luckily, you can get a cheaper wood type and stain it to the finished color that you want to, and that's what I'm doing with this one. But if you are staining, take the time to prep your slab, blow out all the holes. I got my big helper here giving me some tips on what to do. Take the time to prep your slab accordingly, get all the dust out, clean it, make sure it looks good. And then put your stain on, and then we'll get to the finishes. So let's get to work. So let's talk about finishing. Probably the most important part of how you do a project. And the reason why I say that is because you can spend so much time making it or building it or sanding it, whatever. But if you screw up your finish, you have to start everything all over. So typically what I do is I use one coat of Zinsser wax-free shellac. Then I come back and I either use like a wipe-on polyurethane, or if I don't do the shellac, I'll use Rubio monocoat. It's entirely up to you. Typically, if you're on a budget, I use a wipe-on polyurethane and it works out great. Rubio Monocoat is really good for tabletops and stuff, but it's expensive. So I'm gonna just do wipe-on polyurethane for this slab, 50% mineral spirits, 50% polyurethane, and she'll be done. So I did almost forget one of the most annoying things about live edge stuff. And that is end cracks or end grain cracks or checking or whatever you want to call it. So let me show you. So what I normally do is I take a small piece of plywood, I wrap it in Tyvek tape, and I go ahead and I use a spray shellac and I spray shellac everywhere around the crack. And what the shellac does is it doesn't let the epoxy pigment stain the wood. So once you have your piece of wood Tyvexed, you put it on there, screw it into the end grain, and then caulk it underneath and caulk it on the edges here, and that way your epoxy doesn't leak out, and then fill it in. I really hope you've enjoyed the video. Don't be afraid to get into live edge work. It's extremely easy. Don't let it intimidate you. It intimidated me when I got started because it seemed like so much work. I was afraid if I messed up, I ruined the whole slab. But start small, miss small type thing. So start with a small slab and just kind of work your way up to bigger stuff. That way, if you do mess up, you haven't lost much, and you can make some gains with your brain. You'll be good to go. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you on the next one.